Welcome back to Pistons Intellect. Today we're going to be previewing in what I believe is one of the most exciting young players on the Pistons and in the NBA, Ausar Thompson's sophomore season. But before we get into it, I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me over on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_313. You can also follow us over on Instagram, over on TikTok at Pistons_Intellect. And as always, if you're feeling so kind, please hit that subscribe button. As I mentioned, we're going to be previewing Ausar Thompson's sophomore season with the Detroit Pistons. Just before we get into it, I'm going to be doing season previews for each of the 10 to 12 players on the Pistons roster who I can see featuring heavily in the rotation, at least for the first half of the season. And we have a basic formula here. There's 4 sections I want to hit on with each player. Number 1 will be a recap of their prior season and how they got to the Pistons, whether it's by the draft, trade, that kind of thing. Their predicted role will be the second thing I will go through. How do I see them kind of playing out on this roster under JB Bickerstaff? Number 3 will be highlighting a key area for improvement. And number 4 will be one hot take for each player that I can see somewhat happening. But as I said, it's a hot take. So those are the 4 key areas we're going to hit on. And I wanted to start with Ausar Thompson because in my eyes, this might be a bit of a hot take. This isn't my hot take for Ausar, but in my eyes, he has the highest ceiling on this Pistons roster. Now, the question is whether or not he can ever get to that ceiling. But in terms of the athleticism, the size at 6'6", the length, the defensive kind of ability he has, some of the playmaking stuff we've seen, some of the finishing around the rim we've seen, the creativity. I just think if Ausar was to figure out the jumper to an average NBA level, as well as improve some other parts of his games I'll talk about later, I think he has the highest ceiling on this team. Now, that's no discredit to Cade Cunningham. We're going to do a season preview for him, but I think Cade is the best player on this team and will more than likely be the best young player on this team in terms of who the Pistons have right now. But I do think if there's that 5% chance Ausar does figure out the jump shot, figure out some of the other things, a wing that can kind of create their own shot and then be locked down the other end, kind of like Kawhi Leonard-esque, that's kind of like the prototypical star player in today's NBA. So I wanted to start with Ausar. And I think where we'll start is recapping his last season. Now, I'm going to pull up some highlights here to kind of just play while I go through some things here. But Ausar Thompson, as a rookie, averaged just under 9 points, 6.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal. He averaged pretty much 1 block per game, shot just under 50% from the field, shot, I think, around 25% from 3 in his first season. And it was kind of a very up and down rookie season for Ausar. His first 15 games, he was right there with Victor Wembanyama as a rookie of the year. He was leading all rookies in like every major stat. He was, or at least top 2, I should say, in terms of blocks, rebounds, assists. He was everywhere. He was, as you can see here, making plays. He had some really good defensive performances against the likes of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Kevin Durant. I've put countless videos out about his defensive prowess and locking down NBA stars. He was just like, he exceeded everyone's expectations, I think, in those first 15 games. But then as the team and the losing streak kind of continued to expand and we were getting into areas where the Pistons had lost 20 in a row, felt like Monty was making changes to rotation, which brought Ausar off the bench. And then his role was just limited. And he kind of had some rough months there and really faded out. But then I think around the All-Star break, Ausar really started to figure things out again. And he closed the season quite strong, believe it or not. And we'll talk about his shooting a little bit later on. But he actually closed his rookie season shooting around 40% from 3 from the corners. Now, that was only in his final 8 games after the All-Star break. But I think what we saw from Ausar is kind of I think we knew coming out of the draft he was going to make an impact defensively, especially from what we saw at Summer League and that kind of thing. But I don't think anyone expected him to be as active as he was, 1, as a rebounder, but 2, just be able to lock down some of the NBA's best premier scorers from day one. Uh, he gave the likes of, I mentioned SGA, even Luka Doncic in their one matchup. He gave him headaches, and like to have, whilst the jumper is still a major area for concern for Asar, to have a player like him on the roster with all his potential, I think is so exciting. And that kind of leads me to where I see his role for the upcoming season. And I have him coming off the bench. I think he'll be, to open the season, I have him as kind of the first wing off the bench. Maybe he could be the sixth man, but I don't think that really matters. Um, I think he's going to close games. I think he's by far the team's best perimeter defender, which means he's going to play a lot of minutes. And I know a lot of people want to see Asar in the starting lineup. If he's in the starting lineup, I just hope there's enough shooting around him and Jalen Duren. But regardless, I think he's going to play major minutes. I think he's going to play each and every night around 25 minutes or more. I think JB Bickerstaff is going to love Ausar Thompson. We saw Bickerstaff get a lot out of Isaac Okoro. He was Isaac Okoro, who's actually been rumored to the Pistons vaguely, was a guy who figured out a lot last season, figured out the jumper, and he was a guy that JB Bickerstaff went to a lot in playoff games due to his perimeter defense. So I think Bickerstaff's going to love Ausar Thompson, and I think unlike what we kind of saw with Monty Williams, I think Asar's going to have a much more consistent role, and I think we're going to see a really exciting version of Ausar Thompson this season. I think as well, it's important to mention, I didn't mention it there, but he did end last season in kind of an abrupt fashion with some blood clots, which was scary. But from everything we've heard, he's back on the court training and has no limitations. So whilst those type of, I guess, it's weird to call it an injury, but those health scares are very scary. We've seen the likes of Brandon Ingram come back from those. They have ended someone like Chris Bosh's career, but it sounds like Asar's going to be fine. And hopefully this is just a little blimp in the radar and it's something we don't hear about again. But moving on, when we talk about areas for improvement this season, I think the obvious one is shooting. As I mentioned, he closed the season shooting 40% from the corners, very low volume, but nonetheless, across 8 games, that is an improvement for someone of Asar's shooting ability. I think to put that as the biggest area for improvement this season is probably asking too much. I think with the team hiring Fred Vinson, I think whilst I think we could see some improvement across the whole team with their shooting, because I think Fred's going to work with multiple players, not just Ausar and not just Ron Holland. I think Asar's jumper is really a 2 to 3 year type of plan, if not more, because just from where we're starting at, I think his jumper has to be close to rebuilt from the ground up. And that's not to say they haven't already started doing that last season, but I think it's still very much a work in progress. And I think even just getting closer to 30% this season would be a big improvement for Ausar. And then, after 2 to 3 years, hopefully he's around that 35, 36%. But which is why, to be honest, I put down handle and dribbling as kind of the main area for improvement I want to see from Ausar this season. I think as a playmaker and a passer, he has plenty of ability. He's able to make some really nice passes, as you've seen on the vision here, whether he's able to hit cutters. One thing I noticed going back and watching a lot of Asar's assists this season was the amount of pick and roll reps he got to start the season. And I kind of forgot, because that's something the team went away from after the first month or two of the season. I kind of forgot some of how impressive some of the reads were he made in the pick and roll. Now, I don't think that's something you want to see featured heavily in the offense, just because the Pistons, I would like to think, are going to have their veterans and Cade and even Jaden Ivey handling the ball more. But I think just getting him a couple of reps each night could be a beneficiary to him, particularly if he's going against bench lineups. I think putting the ball in his hands just a little bit each and every night to give him some consistency, I think will do wonders. And I think we could see some real improvement there. And the one thing that comes with the passing is, if he can improve that handle, it just unlocks so much more for him because he can get downhill more effectively and then kind of make reads from there in and around the paint where he can be super dangerous. So that's kind of my big area for improvement. In terms of hot take, all defense did cross my mind, but I just can't see the Pistons winning enough games for him to even enter that conversation. And I think there's some wings in the NBA who, like Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and the likes, who are on winning teams who just will get those positions. So that did cross my mind. But I thought a hot take was Ausar finishes top 5 on the Pistons for points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. And I think steals and blocks and rebounds, he definitely finishes top 5. But I think there is a likely world where assists and points, particularly if he can improve that handle, we see a guy that can average 12 to 14 points and kind of, kind of turn himself into that Andre Iguodala type player that, he was kind of, that's the archetype, that's the ceiling for him a little bit. Or one of the outcomes for him is becoming that Andre Iguodala do-it-all wing. And I truly could see him finishing at top 5 in all those major stat categories. And I think that would be an excellent sophomore season for him. But nonetheless, Ausar Thompson is a player I'm super, super keen to see this season. And I'd love to hear all your thoughts in the comments below. What are your expectations for Ausar? Where do you want to see him improve? What's his role? All that kind of jazz. Let me know if you disagree with me, agree with me. I'd love to hear it all. And finally, I appreciate everyone who's sticking with me. I know I just had a bit of a break. I've got some really exciting things in the works for this channel and Pistons Intellect overall for the upcoming season, which I truly cannot wait to share with you all. So thank you for sticking with me while I take this hiatus. I'm planning from now on to be back full steam ahead for the season ahead. So thank you as always. And yeah, once again, as always, go Pistons.